Hey Adrian, how's it going? Yeah, thanks for the comments. I had a quick read through, but I'm just gonna take my time just going back through your points because I've completely forgotten what you said. Blah, 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 blah. Cool, but yes, I think so. This is inevitable. The sort of like um, bench is often super technical for people, right? So backing up the frequency is going to be a problem. In terms of like maintaining that like competency, we can maybe look at keeping this the frequency a bit higher. Let me just play with that and see what we can get away with. But there's as this is like as you say like one of your or like your favorite exercise, there's no reason to we could like prioritize that as something to keep and then work other things around that if that makes sense. I'm sure that will be possible. But this sounds like a reasonable compromise as well. What did you say for the sumo? I can't remember. It doesn't matter. But I think doing the like a top set in a more miserable modality and then a regular style also like afterwards is fine. I think I did. I can't remember if I mentioned or not last week, but the idea of doing some conventional. I think I did. But we can kind of like just change that in and out. We can always keep that like um, well, I was gonna say we could always keep that top set of sumo, but maybe not necessarily. But we could maybe just you know, but what again? Maybe feed that back to me. Like, do you want to keep sumo in just for the sake of doing the sumo? Right? I can understand that if that was the case. Otherwise, it might be fun just to switch out and do something else. I think like you know, with the hack squats, I think this is a great idea. Honestly, um, with the sled would be my preference because that's more standardized, more stability. You can just push harder. But yeah, send me a picture at some point or a video of like either picture of the machine or video of you using it or whatever, just so I can double check and give you some quick thoughts on like how to set things up. Um, Although I guess like realistically it's pretty simple. Set your stance at wherever you need to be, then have your feet as close to the bottom of the pad as you can while you can get full depth. So you get your knees as far forward relative to your feet as you can. It'll take some playing around to get comfortable with. Where am I now? I think that's about it. I can't remember. I have updated the videos. I can't remember what it was. So possibly you just sort of like are thinking of prior to that. The latest ones are my preferred videos though. So do try to stick to those. All right, let's get to this footage here. I mean that was really comfy, right? So that's a pretty good end to the block there, given the reduced frequency. I think that's really nice. Um, yeah, bench is actually looking super tidy. See how we're doing with these high reps. Like obviously they are going to be a bit more of a challenge just in terms of breathing, but I do think it's quite good practice to like, do a high rep set and then have to breathe and brace around that. I think that's actually sometimes anyway a good training stimulus in terms of like skill practice. These look really really good though, rock solid, very consistent. Depth may be a little bit high, but we now don't really care so much about that. Maybe the angle's also being a bit unkind there, hard to say. Yeah, really good, really good. Something to say a little bit about these, right, is that on a lot of these, it looks like you're not letting the bar completely come to rest in between the reps. So having some tension in that bar will make it much much easier. Um, so like, you know, there is an argument for keeping constant tension. I think that's quite effective with a stiff bar, um, but I think it's less useful to do that with a bendy bar, to be honest. But generally speaking, shape here looks really nice. Just be careful with the head position on these as well, right? Like having your head cranked there is going to make it really hard to keep ribs down. All right, let's take a look at these. Yeah, immediately head position on this. And also you've got to differentiate between, so what I like having, your arm as support for these. Obviously it can be a little tricky to set that up on whatever cable machine you have. This would be okay if you were leaning back a bit more. So right now, not just in your head but in your whole torso, right now this is almost like doing an overhead kind of like pull down position, right? We want to try to keep for like a horizontal row, we want to have sort of the line of pull here to be as close to, well, 90 degrees basically, right to the angle of your torso. Yeah, remember the goal here is to not get your elbow back behind your body, but to get your elbow like down here somewhere. And also as well, the thing that's I think quite bad about this position, this setup that you've got here, is that the position of like peak stretch, um, there's no tension, right? The plates are at rest on each other. So it's not the end of the world, but like the stretch is a really good hypertrophy stimulus. So I think I try to change that setup so that you can be more upright, which would then naturally kind of mean that the plates aren't at rest at the at end range there. So with these guys, so this is the front delt press, right? The idea isn't, you can't really see what I'm doing. You kind of want to be not so much here, but like here, right? This is really an isolation of the front delt over here, whereas this is not quite so much. So bear that in mind. I do quite like the idea of a machine overhead press. As you note, that's kind of disability is your friend in that context. But give these a try just with a slightly more like adducted elbow position, so like slightly more tucked. And yeah, just be aware here of like not letting your ribs come up quite so much. You're not going to be able to stay very like completely neutral, but this is like basically you're turning this into a bit of like an incline dumbbell press, if that makes sense, which is going to be easier, right? You get more weight in your hands, but you remove the isolation from the shoulders specifically, which is what I want for that slot. Yeah, head position. This is also mechanically, right, super similar to what I don't want you doing on the dips, right? So you can see there's all of this rounding in your upper back as you go into like this peak kind of shoulder extension. Your shoulder here is like coming forwards in the socket, which is not what we want. So try to stay nice and straight through your whole spine, spine ends at the bottom of your skull. And yeah, just have a little bit more to think about this. So for this like upper back biased row, we want to keep the elbows relatively flared. So like lat, more of a lat bias row, you'd have some degree of tucking in the elbows. But here we're trying to target kind of like posterior delt, like rhomboids, the teres a bit more. So having the elbow flared will slightly reduce the stimulus to the lats. This is something else. So, but yeah, give these a. Let me see if you give me a second set with these, right? That's already better. Yeah. But just right, so we don't want the head to come forwards, right? We want this to keep nice and neutral. And in general with these, like, don't at rest, you don't want to have your shoulders kind of shrugging up to your ears, right? We want to have shoulders down here, because like it's this classic dysfunction. Our shoulders should just be able to kind of like come around as we kind of like go into protraction. So retraction, protraction. We should be able to do this without doing this, right? With that shoulder coming up above the rib cage. And if we can't do that, that drives a whole host of horrible dysfunction. So just make sure that, yeah, you're doing this in a proper like protraction, retraction field. Good. Keep these knees a tiny bit more locked out than you're doing. Tiny bit, yeah, I think a little bit straighter. Give you a bit more load on the hamstrings. But otherwise, these look pretty good. Just going to skip through these a little bit. Yeah, these now look awesome. Yeah, just be a little bit aware of like this, of where you define end range, right? So, excuse me. So make sure that at end range, you aren't dumping your shoulder like up and over your rib cage, sort of like I've been chatting about. I think that's the only thing I would say about those. I think we're basically on track to slot in dips next block. I think these look really good. So that's awesome. All right, Adrian. Well, yeah, thanks for all the stuff this week, and yeah, look forward to kind of resting you up for this deload, and we can give you some cool stuff in this next block. All right, cheers.